So this panel right here, I don't know if they all say that, but it's your reminder, because people will forget. You'll look at that panel and like, oh my gosh, do I rule out on the positives or the negatives? Without the theory and understanding exactly what you're doing, you're gonna be nervous, especially your first time, and you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. Well, this tells you right here. Use the antigen negative reactions to rule out. So where it's negative, where your patient didn't react. So that will remind you. If anybody has yours, you can look and see if it says it. I don't have it. I don't remember seeing that on a real anagram. So maybe this is just for like teaching purposes. So they're gonna have a file cabinet or some kind of folder or something where the patients, the antibody workups that they've been doing, that way you can go back and look at them. So it'll be a packet that's stapled together. If you get in there and you can't remember what to do, get one of those if you're by yourself and see what the last person did. Look at a couple of them and see, pick one that somebody's doing it the same way you do it, because people will do it different ways on their anagram. Pick one the way that you like to do it and see what they did. There's always a way to look it up. Don't panic. You can text me on your break, not in front of the blood bank. If there's something that you really need to know that you don't want to ask them. But I want you to read about it first. It's a technical manual. Okay, interpretation guidelines. Do y'all want to take a break? No? Okay. The reaction strength. Reactions with varying strengths usually means there's more than one antibody. So if there's several 3+ and a bunch of 1+, then there may be 2 different kinds of antibodies, or it's showing dosage. So do I have, I don't know, say it's a JKA, all the heterozygous cells are 1+, all the homozygous cells are 3+. Then you can tell that, okay, this one's a JKA showing dosage. So ruling out antibodies, you rule out on the cells that are negative in all phases, which is what we were doing a second ago. Begin with the first cell that's negative in all phases and start crossing out the antigens that are on that cell where you didn't get any reactivity. Panel cells that are heterozygous should not be crossed out because it may be too weak to react. Everybody got it? That makes sense? So on your panel today, we'll make some notes on it. Matching the pattern, so that one matched the kill, so that's what I just showed you. The pattern of the reactions matches one of the antigen columns when it's a single antibody. Multiple antibodies can have varying patterns. Rule of 3, so to ensure valid results, 3 antigen positive cells must react, 3 antigen negative cells must not react. If this does not occur, then you can pull additional panel cells, and that's called selected cells. So they'll usually keep more than one antibody panel. And if you didn't have enough cells to rule out one of your antibodies. So say I thought I had an anti-E. It fit the pattern. But on my anagram, I couldn't rule out JKA. So I would get my panel. Who has their anagram? I kind of want you to have that anagram every day. So you'll look at it. I can't even see these on my PowerPoint.
Which one? This one?
Either way. So I would look at that anagram and I would look at all my big E negative cells, right? Because if it's big E positive, I'm going to get reactivity. I'm trying to rule out. So I would look for the first cell that was E negative, big E negative, and JKA positive, because I rule out on the cells that have the antigen on there where my plasma didn't react. So I want a big E negative cell that is JKA positive. And I want one that's homozygous for JKA. Is that blowing your mind? It took me a minute to understand how to pull my cells. So we'll try to practice that before y'all are done. So if you look down on your panel, if you have it, cell number, has anybody found one yet?
Cell 5, maybe?
Cell number 5. That's the one I would use. So I would pull cell number 5, and I would do it just like I did my initial antibody screening. So if you ran it on the machine, great. So then you just do that manual cell. And so I pull that cell out of the fridge. If it's expired, you have to do controls on it. No, you can't use expired reagents in the lab, especially in the blood bank, except for if you were trying to rule out. And if you do, you have to prove that it works for the antigen you're trying to rule out. So I would pull out some anti-JKA antisera. I'm not expecting you to understand this all right now, but I want to expose you to it, and we'll do it again later. So, let's see. This is for selected cells. And so I'm selecting a cell that's going to help me rule out. So my patient has an anti-E. I'm trying to rule out if you didn't read the chapter, this is one that you need to read, because after we've talked about it and you go back and read it, it's going to help it stick in your brain. If you don't, I can only say it so many times, if you don't understand, you're going to have a hard time when you go to clinicals, because you're really going to have to do this. So you have to let me know. Okay, so I'm going to pull a cell that's E negative. That's for the antigen, right? JKA positive and homozygous. So say I already have 2 that are JKA positive on my panel. I need 1 more. There wasn't enough on that panel. So if it's expired, I'll have to do controls. I don't expect you to know how to do that now. They're gonna show you. So I'm gonna pull out some anti-JKA antisera. I'm gonna get 3 tubes. Don't laugh at my drawing. In this one, I'm gonna add the anti-JKA antisera. And that cell that we picked out off that anagram, the JKA positive cell. I'm gonna do a negative control, so I can use saline in the place of that anti-JKA antisera. So just a blank, something, if they make you do you'll follow their procedure. They're gonna have a procedure for pulling selected cells. They may not make you do a negative control. If they do, just use saline, or whatever the procedure tells you to do. Saline plus the JKA positive cell. Which was cell number 5 on that anagram. And then in this one, I'm gonna add my patient's plasma, which is what I used for my antibody ID already. So this is just doing an antibody panel, but with just 1 cell. Just picked out the cell that I needed. With that JKA positive E negative cell. So if my patient has an anti-E, we're using an E negative cell because we're hoping that it's negative. If that cell is negative and it's homozygous for JKA, so picture your anagram on cell number 5 with a 0 out to the side at AHG. So you can use that to rule out. And so once I put that slash mark on JKA, which is hopefully it's negative, that's my third cell, I can rule it out. So it's a lot of work to do that, but that's the only way to complete your antibody ID. If you can't rule it out, you can say unable to rule out, say you don't have any cells on another panel. That does happen. So then what are you gonna do? You know you're gonna get E negative units. So you're gonna phenotype for E. You're just gonna find a cell that's also JKA negative. And then when you carry it through cross-match, it should be compatible, and then you know it's gonna be safe for the patient, because even though you couldn't rule this one out, if your unit's negative, then it doesn't matter anyways. Is that making sense to people? I know, like, the first time you hear it, it's like you're speaking another language. I've been talking for like an hour, let's take a break. It's an example of what I just did. It's an example of ruling out matching the pattern. So, some people, maybe that have been doing this for 100 years, can just look at this and just mark them out up here. I still can't do that, because what if you're wrong? So I mark out each one of my little antigens that are homozygous as I go. So it shows you here, you only have reactions with AHG. Kel fits the pattern perfectly. They ruled everything else out except for Lutheran A. So remember I told you about the Lutherans, they're not really that important. So they can't rule out Lutheran A because it's not present on any of these cells, which means it's low frequency. Nobody has the antigen. If it's not there, you can't rule it out. So the point of the story is Lutheran antigen is rare. The probability of somebody having an antibody is rare. So the probability of you giving them, even if they did an antigen positive unit, that'd be like you finding a unicorn in your, 20 units you had to pick from in your refrigerator. So it's not a big deal. So we're not really worried about it because it's so low frequency. And you can tell that because out of these 10 people, how many is on here? Out of these 10 people, nobody has the antigen. So your patient probably don't either. And even if they do, the likelihood that they have been exposed to it, well, if they do have it, they're not going to make an antibody anyway. That was stupid. No, okay. So the other ones that we're not really going to worry about is CW.
Don't worry about CW.
So one time, I've seen one time on a CAP survey, on an elution survey, and we missed it because, did I give you a copy of the antibody screen also? Maybe there is a cell on there that's positive for CW. But you're only as good as your reagents that you have. So you start with the antibody screen, right? If the screen's negative, you don't do any further testing. Our antibody screen, and most of the ones that we got ever, didn't have a cell for CW on it. If there's no cells there that have the antigen, you're not gonna pick it up if you have one. So what you're hoping is, at cross-match, you'll pick it up if it's there and the patient does have the antibody. Because if you don't have any antigen-positive cells on your screen, you're not gonna detect it if they have one. So we missed it, but we weren't counted wrong for it because everybody that was using the same screen as us missed it because you didn't, and they understand that, right? So it's not really clinically significant anyways, most of the time. So the FDA allows them to make that screen without one because it doesn't really matter that much. So we don't really worry about CW. KPA, which is not even on here, so obviously that one doesn't matter. JSA.
It's on ours.
And so if you picked it up, anyways, it's on there, but you wouldn't really worry about it. So if you couldn't rule it out, it wouldn't really matter. And JSA, is that on yours? Yeah, so you don't really worry about JSA either, so you can write that down. So CW, JSA, Lutheran A, and KPA. So you don't really have to worry about these according to your textbook.
What's the XG?
Oh, so that's the one that we talked about, that was, the men can pass it down to their daughters because it's on the X chromosome or whatever. I've never seen one in real life. So if you have reactivity there, that's when you would worry about it. Otherwise, we're almost always gonna be able to rule it out. So these, even if you can't rule them out. So even if you can't rule them out, you don't really have to worry about them. This is what I didn't know at clinicals, and I was sitting there with my anagram that they gave me for an hour, looking at these four that I couldn't rule out, wondering, now what am I supposed to do? Well, I guess I'm supposed to know what to do. They don't really matter. So they're either low frequency or high frequency, which means the likelihood of it being your antibody is super low. Okay? So don't go crazy at clinicals. So if you did a cross match through AHG and it was incompatible, just get another unit and do it again. Try that one. I've done that before. Just try again. If you've ruled everything else out except for one of those, it's too much trouble. You might not even be able to figure it out. Just pick another unit. So phenotyping the patient. That's another way to confirm the presence of antibody, is to determine the patient's phenotype for that antigen. Individuals do not make alloantibodies to the antigens that you have on your red cells. So we've said that a million times, right? If the patient has been recently transfused, they can do this red cell separation technique. That's probably something they do at a reference lab. So where I worked, we would just say unable to phenotype due to recent transfusion. So maybe a question on the test like this. If anti-E was identified in the patient's serum, plasma, whatever. Not yet. Anti-E was identified in the patient's plasma. The patient phenotype what would you do next? So they have an anti-E, but they're E positive, or you think they have an anti-E. Then you phenotype them, which is what you do as long as they haven't been recently transfused. You do that every time. It's like your quality control for your antibody ID to make sure they don't have the antigen. So what are you gonna do next? First thing you're gonna do is investigate their transfusion history, because if there's donor cells floating around in there, then your antigen typing could be picking that up. Can't transfuse somebody you can't phenotype somebody that's been transfused in the last 3 months. So first thing you would do, check transfusion history. And so phenotyping is the same thing as antigen typing. hear it called both. So you need to know that that is the same thing. So phenotyping, antigen typing is the same thing. So first thing you do is check their transfusion history. If they've not been transfused, then your antibody ID is wrong. And you have to prove that they haven't been transfused, because some patients won't, if they won't, then maybe they don't even know. If they have not been transfused, your ABID, antibody ID, is wrong. And that's how you know that you need to look at it again. So it can be wrong as even, you're gonna take this anagram and fill in your results from the machine or from your tubes, whatever, and you're doing 1+, this one's negative, 2+, this one's negative, 1+. And so if you get off a line, just like if you were doing a Scantron, anybody used a Scantron before, or is that after y'all? Y'all did it before? Remember, if you got off track with your bubbles, everything's wrong. If you mess up your reactions here, you're not gonna get the right answer. So it could be as simple as that, making sure you filled it out right, like transcription errors. It could be that you have the wrong lot number paper. So, first thing you would do before you redid a whole bunch of work, make sure you wrote it down right. Make sure you have the right anagram, check all your stuff. If you have the wrong one, or you wrote it down wrong, just get another one, write it down again, rule out again. Make sure you got the right answer. That's the things you need to check. So, there may be a question like this on the test. If you detect an antibody, what you think it is, phenotype them, and they're positive, which they should not be. Check to see if they've been transfused, that would explain it. Or, if they have not, and you can prove it, then check your answer, check your antibody answer.
Is there an if yes option?
What do you mean?
Like if they have been transfused, that's your answer then, right?
Yeah, then you would say unable to phenotype due to recent transfusion. Unless you were in a reference lab and then they may be able to do that separation technique. So there's some way they can, transfused cells are older than the patient's cells typically because they've been donated, they've been sitting on a shelf, they're not as fresh. So the patient has some young red blood cells, you're making some every day, right? So there's some way that they centrifuge it to separate out the patient's young cells, the ones that they've just made, and they can pull them off and phenotype them that way. That's not typical blood bank stuff. I've never seen that before. They just want you to know that is something that they can do, and you're probably not gonna do unless you work in a reference lab. So I've read about it, I've never seen it before in real life. So in the regular blood bank, you're just gonna say that you couldn't phenotype. So what's gonna be your QC to make sure that your antibody ID is right if you can't do that? To make sure the unit's gonna be compatible. You're gonna do a cross match. You still have a cross match. And if it's compatible, which means no agglutination with the donor red blood cells and your patient's plasma all the way through AHG, then it's almost 100% that the patient's gonna have a safe transfusion if there's no like febrile reaction or something weird happening. Okay, if you have multiple antibodies, matching the pattern is harder. Nobody likes multiple antibodies. Varying reactions may be observed. So if you have varying reactions, it's probably something showing dosage, or there's more than one. So you can use selected cells, which is what we just talked about. Enzymes. So if you thought you had a Duffy and an RH, you could do an enzyme panel to get one of them out of the way. So you can see just the one, right? DTT, this is DTT. So if you had a KEL and another antibody, remember DTT destroys KEL. Oh, it says it right here. It's used to denature KEL, so you can get the KEL out of the way. This is probably reference lab stuff, but they just want you to know for theory reasons. So KEL is not affected by enzymes. Make sure you don't forget that. Anyways, KEL's not affected by enzymes. We've already talked enough about enzymes, I think. They're used to eliminate or enhance reactions. Duffy and M&S are destroyed, the arrows are in the wrong place. RH Kid and Lewis are enhanced. So there's two ways to do it. We had an enzyme panel, like an antibody panel, that had both, like the enzyme treated cells on top of the regular cells. So it was already treated. You can treat them yourself with enzymes. I've never seen anything like that. So this is a Bison treated panel, which is what we had in the blood bank. The only one I have experience with. So this patient they didn't give you the answer. Oh. What cuts it off? So this is a Bison treated panel which removed the Duffy antigens. That's what it's saying. So you can see the E better. It's very confusing to me. Okay, so Duffy was originally on here, but it didn't react because the enzyme panel made it not work. And so it allows the E to show up. So you didn't have any reactivity where Duffy is on the cell. So Duffy is here, but it's not showing up. And it allows you to see just the E cells. You're not going to do this very often. I would imagine. Antibodies to high frequency antigens. So high frequency antigens are when they occur in the population 98% or more. So almost everybody has the antigen. That means you're not hardly ever going to see the antibodies. If everybody has the antigen, nobody's going to make the antibody. You would suspect an alloantibody to a high frequency antigen if almost all of your panel cells are positive. So if almost everybody has the antigen, so if you look at the one that I just gave you, Lutheran B, look at Lutheran B, it's almost at the end. Every cell on there is positive. So if you had a Lutheran B antibody, you're gonna have positive reactivity on every cell, because every cell's positive for it. And that's how you're gonna know. So then you're gonna have to decide, is it an auto antibody, or is it a real allo antibody? So what are you gonna do to decide whether it's an allo or an auto antibody? No, it's a test. We talked about it in the beginning, auto control. Yay! So that's gonna tell you if it's positive, then it's an auto antibody. If it's negative, it's a real allo antibody. I think that's all my snacks.
You said auto control too?
Yeah, so the first thing, oh, there's one more. First thing you do is auto control to decide is if everything's positive, now your blood bankers, the first thing we're thinking, it's a warm auto. We hate warm autos. You're not gonna rule anything out if everything's positive. That's what we used to do. Then you do an auto control. That's what you should do. Then you know, if it's positive, it is a real auto antibody. You're probably gonna send it to the reference lab. If it's a real allo antibody, you're probably still gonna have to send it to the reference lab, because you're not gonna have enough Lutheran negative cells to determine it.
Whenever we get to the lab to differentiate antibodies, we're gonna walk through like the chart and everything.
We're gonna do the chart today. That's why I made this one with reactivity on it. But you're also gonna get to do one in real life, like with the tubes, and then write your reactions down and rule out that way. So plenty of practice. Because I don't want you to go to clinicals like I did and not remember a single thing. Okay, so additional testing, maybe you needed, and so if you can't figure it out, if you really can't figure it out, there's always the reference lab. They'll let you know if it's time to send it out, especially at first. Okay, so here's an example of an antibody to a high frequency antigen. So you only had one negative cell here. So this has to be the one that they're talking about. Yeah, it's an anti-Chelano. And so they're lucky they even had that one negative cell. You can't rule it, you know, you need 3 negatives to rule out, so you wouldn't be able to rule anything out. But it just shows you what it looks like.
And then the patient cells, that's your auto control down there where it says 0.
So you'd mix the patient cells. I mean, you see here that the auto control is negative all the way through. It's, you know you're looking at a real allo antibody. I wonder if the other one had the auto control on it. Yeah. Check cells worked. And so sometimes they'll grade the check cells, sometimes they'll just do a check. Watch what they're doing at your blood bank and do that. We always graded them, like 2+ or whatever. We're not really worried about these high titer, low avidity antibodies. So these low frequency antibodies to low frequency antigens may occur alone or when the screen is negative and then so your antibody screen is negative and your cross match isn't compatible. I'll just get another unit and try it again. So only one reactive cell determines that that's that kind of antibody. And so these are the common ones. Just try to find a unit that's compatible through AHG. You're probably only going to pick those up in a cross match. So enhancing weak antibodies. So you can increase the serum to cell ratio within the limits of the reagent. How are you going to know what you can do with the reagent? Whether you can add more plasma to 1 drop of cells.
Insert.
Yep, read the package insert. Did you get a snack already?
Oh.
Read the package insert, and it's gonna tell you. So you know you add 2 drops of plasma. Maybe it will say that you can add up to 4. So you have to read the package insert. So if you were having trouble, that's when you're gonna go back and read the package insert again. Because when you read it last time, you may have been looking at it for another problem. So you're gonna read them all the time. Package insert tells you what you can do. You'll phenotype them if they haven't been recently transfused. So that's within 3 months. And they just say 3 months to be safe, because red cells, once they're transfused, they're not gonna live 3 months. So that gives you time to make sure they're out of the patient's system. So check for dosage. Is it something that shows dosage? Select cells from a different panel. Incubate it for longer. So most of the reagents you can incubate up to, we do 15 minutes, because we don't have all day. You can do it up to 30. If you're using albumin, like BSA, sometimes you can do for like up to an hour. Saline, you can use just saline. It may be even longer than an hour. So you'll just have to read your procedures and your package insert. So there's lots of stuff you can do to investigate. So cold allo antibodies, so cold antibodies, say like M's or something that they made from pregnancy or transfusion, they usually only react at immediate spin. So a lot of the machines, the analyzers in the blood bank, you'll notice that it doesn't give you an immediate spin reading. It only reads at AHG. Why? Those are the only ones that are clinically significant. The ones that show up, if they show up here, that's the only ones we care about. So lots of people that you're getting the results on, and you say calling it negative, a lot of those people probably have anti-M's, but it goes away. We're not worried about it. We don't even want to know. We don't even want to know they have that. And so then you do a cross match if you do 2 cross matches. Some places do what's called an electronic cross match. We'll talk about that in the next chapter, where you don't physically mix their plasma with donor cells. If they don't have any antibodies and no history of antibodies, sometimes the computer says they can have any random unit off the shelf without any more testing, and you just give them blood, and that's the easy one. First time I ever did it, it was so scary because I didn't do a cross match. So they started doing that when I was on maternity leave, and I did a serologic cross match. I pulled a segment off of a donor unit, added 2 drops of the patient's plasma, and did a real cross match. Every unit, I saw it with my eyes that the unit was gonna be okay. I was gone for 3 months, and then they took cross matches away for anybody that didn't have an antibody. I was so scared to do that first computer cross match without looking in a tube to see if it was okay. So, it is a lot easier, because if the patient had an M, I might pick that up in a cross match. Well then, now I'm like, oh no, something's wrong. Because it showed up at immediate spin. So we're incubating all the antibody screens. If it goes away at 37 degrees, who cares? We're not worried about it. Sometimes they will react at 37 degrees. If they do, then you would just figure out what it is and give them blood negative for that antigen, which could be M or N or whatever. So if they don't react at 37, then we don't care. They're not significant. P1, M, and N have variable reactions, which means they can show up here. If they don't, great. So to incubate, you can incubate at below room temperature, which is in the refrigerator, to enhance reactions if they're weak. And you can avoid reactions doing this neutralization technique, which I have never done before. So it's on page 206 in your book. I want you to read about it, just in case you see it again. You're probably not gonna do it. So I think P1 is where they neutralize with that hydatid cyst fluid, the tapeworm cyst that you get in your brain or whatever. So, I mean, I don't think you're gonna be doing that. But in case you see it again, I want you to read the whole chapter though. So here's an example of a cold reacting antibody. So it reacted at immediate spin. It's still there at 37 degrees and at AHG. So it didn't go all the way away. We would just respect it. They're saying this is a M, which makes sense, but it fits the pattern. And so you would just give them M negative blood. Cross match through Coombs or AHG. So this may be a test question.
On here is,
I haven't made the test yet, but it's one of the ones in the bank. Why is the glutamation? That means antibody screen. So why is the glutination reaction phase, and so that means, does it react at immediate spin or AHG? Oh, that's terrible.
Because it'll tell you if you should go to the AHG.
Yes, so that tells you if you need to worry about it or not. So if it's not an IgG antibody, then you're not gonna worry about it. So that's why the reaction phase is important. It tells you the class of the antibody. So that tells you whether it's IgM or IgG. So if you have an anti-M that's reacting here, well, at AHG, it probably has part of an IgG component to it. Because you know, there's variations in all these different antigens. And so maybe that antibody has an IgG component. Oh no. Since we're back, did everybody get it? Oh, back to, speaking of cold antibodies. So, you need to know for the test that most cold autoantibodies are of I specificity, big I. Got it?
No.
Maybe I did skip ahead a little bit, but. I said this was gonna be shorter, I was wrong, sorry y'all. Autoantibodies, they usually react with all reagents and self and donor red cells regardless of what antigens are present. The autocontrol and the DAT will be positive. It's important to identify whether it's an allo antibody or an autoantibody. And so adsorption techniques are usually used to remove autoantibodies because you need to know if there's an underlying allo antibody. So adsorption is a procedure that uses red cells with known antigens to remove red blood cell antibodies from the plasma. So if it's an autoantibody getting in the way. So say, for example, a group A red blood cells can remove anti-A from the plasma because the anti-A in the plasma will agglutinate with the A cells. So that can be used for IgG antibodies too. That's reference lab stuff, but you just have to know what it's used for. So this is where I was supposed to be when we were talking about the anti-I. So typical cold autoantibodies only react at immediate spin and at the immediate spin cross match. The autocontrol will be positive to complement, so not IgG. So you wouldn't do an elution if it's just complement. Cold autoantibodies may occur in individuals with mild anemia, the mycoplasma pneumonia, so pneumonia, and infectious mono. But remember, usually it's like the little I is causing it when people that have mono. Big I, this is the one I want you to worry about, not the other ones. Anti-big I. Most cold autoantibodies are due to anti-big I. You need to know that one for the test. Don't worry about the other two. So here's an example of a cold autoantibody. If it's auto, they have an antibody to their own cells, everything's gonna be positive. It's also showing up at AHG. All their cells are coded, probably with complement. So you suspect an autoantibody when everything is positive. Look at their autocontrol. Ooh, scared me to death. Scared you too? I thought it was like a rat or something. Okay. Autocontrol, everything's positive, then you know that is an autoantibody. That's how you know. So avoiding cold autoantibody reactions, using monospecific anti-IgG reagents. So that anti-IgG in the green bottle is what we're using. That's monospecific. It only has IgG. Polyspecific, remember, has IgG and complement. So we use anti-IgG. You can use poly, but you might get reactions that you don't want. We only want IgG because we're looking for IgG antibodies, right? We don't want to pick up complement. You can skip the immediate spin cross-matching. The computer, when you're putting in your results, if you do it manually, it's gonna make you put in immediate spin results. So you're just gonna have to follow their policy of what they want you to do. You're not gonna be doing something like this by yourself the first time. The first time you see this, somebody's gonna help you, and they'll tell you how to do it. Take note, when you're doing this stuff that you don't do very often, write down how you put it in the computer. This is what I did when this happened. Something, you're gonna have a locker, put your notes in there. Because the stuff that doesn't happen very often, you're not gonna remember, oh, this is how I put it in the computer last time, because the computer will drive you crazy. Because you have to do something, and if you do something it doesn't like, it's gonna tell you, so take some notes. Pre-warming all the tubes to 37 degrees will avoid reactivity. Okay, this right here, I even sent this to my blood bank friends when I was doing the lecture. So it says avoid washing with warm saline. So remember I told you we would put the whole bottle of saline in a bag and put it in the water bath to warm up? Okay, so here it says not to do it, right? Everybody does it. So I sent them a picture of that and I was like, this is like, what I was trying to say was, this is what y'all showed me to do. So I sent that before I finished. So here's the procedure, and it says, pre-warm a container of saline at 37 degrees before you're washing. So I sent them this one next, and I was like, my bad. They were like, well, I mean, that's how you do it. I'm like, I'm sorry I said anything.
Then why would it say?
I don't know. That, everybody warms their saline to do the washes, because if you're using cold saline, then the point of you the point of you incubating and getting everything warm, what was the point? So, follow their procedure, how about that? Because that doesn't make any sense to me. And I know that's what everybody does. Unless there's something that I don't know about. Maybe there is. This absorption technique, I just want you to read about it. Warm autoantibodies are a nuisance. Everybody hates them. They're more common than cold, like great, something that's gonna show up at 37 degrees if it's warm, and then it's gonna be in the way. So warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia may be idiopathic, so for some reason that they don't know why, or due to a drug. Using 22% albumin, so it comes in a little reagent bottle. I've never used it before. Reference labs probably use it, and you may use it wherever you go, but I've never used it before. Because we send out all of our warm autoantibodies. Because you don't have time to work on something that takes this long. You just don't. So it's important to determine if underlying antibodies exist. So the whole point of worrying about these warm autoantibodies is because everything will be positive. Well, if it's all positive, you can't rule anything out. So they could have an underlying alloantibody that you can't identify. Because without being able to rule anything out, you have no idea what's there. So we sent them to the reference lab, and they told us if they had any antibodies or not. And they sent us compatible units, and so we just did a cross match. So they did the hard part for us. Now, I have a friend that went through the program after me that is working at the Red Cross. So she went and got her MLS somewhere. Wherever she went and did it, the hospital paid for it. And now she works at Red Cross just doing blood bank. She was my friend in MLS program. I forgot. Yeah. So her husband was in my class, and when we got to the MLS program, somehow I found out that she was in it. She started when I did. So we helped each other through the program. Now she works at the Red Cross, and so she had never even done elution. Some hospitals send them out because they do take time. I liked doing it because it's fun. It's like a little kit, and it has all these different reagents, and you add like 20 drops of this, and then you spit it down. I thought that was fun. And then at the end, when you do an acid elution, your sample is blue. You have this blue liquid at the end, and then you set it up just like an antibody panel. And so it was kind of like, I like to cook. I guess I liked the cookbook, following the steps, add so much of this. That was fun to me.
That sounds boring.
Well, she had never done it before because at Providence where she worked, they don't do them. They may now, but they didn't then. I don't know. And so she was talking to me about it when we were doing our blood bank class. And when I found out they didn't do them, I was like, how do you resolve your antibody IDs if you don't do elutions? And she's like, oh, we send them to the Red Cross. So just because you don't know how to do everything doesn't mean you can't go work at those jobs, because they're gonna show you what you've never seen before. So I don't want any of it to be scary. They don't expect you to know everything, and they're gonna know wherever you go that you haven't seen everything, because nobody does everything, except for maybe a reference lab. some patients, most patients with warm autoantibodies, they're directed against the Rh system, especially the little e antigen. So that is so annoying, because look at your panel, look at little e. There's one cell on there that's negative for little e, and sometimes there's not one at all, which means everything's gonna be positive. Why did it have to pick that one? Why couldn't it pick one that was like a low frequency? But that's what the autoantibodies look like. And so they'll be E positive. They'll have the E antigen, little E antigen, and it'll look like they also have the little E antibody. Why? So that's the only case you would see that. The DAT is gonna be positive in an autoantibody. And so they don't really recommend transfusing patients with warm autos. I mean, if they're about to die, then bad blood's better than no blood. But if they have a warm autoantibody, the cross-match is gonna be incompatible at 37 degrees or at AHG, because it's a warm autoantibodies on all of their cells. So they say that sometimes giving E negative blood can increase red cell survival. So most of these people that have these warm autoantibodies, it's a warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So that's why these people are getting blood bank work done, because they have a low H&H, because they're already hemolyzing their own cells. They made an antibody that looks like it's against their own cells. Almost everybody's E positive, little E positive. So they recommend not transfusing. So if they're hemolyzing their cells, which are probably little E positive, right? So you keep throwing blood on top of them, they're just feeding the fire. You're just giving them more cells to hemolyze. So this is, like this warm autoimmune hemolytic anemia is a symptom of another disease, right? So they recommend, and you'll notice on your reference lab papers when they come in, when they do send something out, and it comes back, read it. It'll tell you, we do not recommend transfusing this patient, but if you do, we recommend units that are negative for this antigen and this one or whatever, because they'll usually phenotype the patient. So there's lots of information that you can read on there that helps this stuff make sense. Stuff like just stuff that you won't get to see normally. So read them, and sometimes they'll have a binder with all those reference lab printouts in it. Go look through it. There's all kind of cool stuff in there. And then medications can also cause a positive DAT. So you'll make like an antibody to the drug. So most of the time when you stop the drug, it goes away. That's something I forgot to tell you. So the most important thing, this may be on the test. The most important, whoa. We are ID stands for identify. A warm auto is a warm auto antibody. Is determining whether there are underlying alloantibodies. So the most important thing we're worried about when trying to ID antibodies in a patient with a warm auto is determining, because almost everything's going to be positive. And so you wanna know if there are any underlying IgG allo antibodies, which you won't be able to see if everything's positive. It's just gonna look like you can't rule anything out. So there could be, they could have other antibodies. Does it smell like ramen noodles? Does it smell ramen noodles? Are we almost done? Yes, we are almost done. Oh my God. So this drug mechanism, the one that I want you to be to know for the test, methyl-dopa. It's probably one of the main ones that causes it. I can't remember what it's for. Anybody know, anybody work in a pharmacy? Methyl-dopa, I don't remember what it's for. But this is, so you'll need to know it for the test. This is the most likely to cause production of autoantibodies, the most likely drug.
Yes, it's blood pressure medicine.
So that's what I was thinking, but I didn't know if I was right. So it can also be caused by drugs like penicillin, antibiotics, anti-inflammatory drugs, so NSAIDs, so ibuprofen is an NSAID, I think aspirin is, Aleve. All those are antibiotics. And so if you thought you had one and you were working in a reference lab or something, you would get the patient's medication history. So anytime you send out a specimen to the reference lab, they're gonna ask you, there's a paper that you fill out, drug history is gonna be on there. They wanna know what drugs they're on. It's important. That's how you know what's causing the problem. Elution. So to identify antibodies, when the DAT is positive, IgG must be detached by using an elution technique. I want you to read about this in the textbook. We probably are not gonna get to do one in real life, in class. Because I don't have a kid to do it with. So the recovered antibody is called an eluate, and the eluate is used in an antibody panel. So when you get your eluate specimen, so you can do it like 3 different ways. We did the acid elution, so it was just an acid solution that came in these little bottles, and a special wash solution, so instead of washing with saline, you wash with this special solution. And you end up, when you did the acid elution, we ended up with a little tube, just a blood bank tube of this blue liquid, maybe, I mean, hopefully at least a mil. And then you would work it up just like plasma. You would do an antibody panel on it. And so what you're hoping is, if there's antibody attached to the patient's red cells that you didn't pick up in your first antibody screen using their plasma, then you'll pick it up here. So if it was so much of it was attached to the red cells instead of in the plasma, so you're literally pulling it off the cells. So the acid makes it elute off, makes it come off. So it's performed in suspected cases of HDFN, so you could do it on a cord blood. And sometimes they're negative. If somebody has a warm autoantibody, it may be negative. And so that's normal, I mean, it is a normal, don't think you did it wrong if your elution is negative. You can read about the procedure. This is the one that I used. So if I got a kit, we could do it, but the shelf life of them is not very long. Absorption, I would just want you to go and read about it. So that's where they remove some antibodies from the plasma so that you can see the other antibodies that are there. And you can read about it. And that, we're not worried about that either. Yay! So I didn't, when I read it, it wasn't a lot to me. But then showing you all the, like how to rule out and all that stuff, that did take longer than I thought. Because it's a lot at first.
Are we staying here?
Yeah, so I can can walk around and help you while you're trying to rule out on this anagram. I think we should stay